Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
I am Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Unfixed is just part of our portfolio. Check out our writing at meltsintoair.org and subscribe to our twice-a-month newsletter where we run down the top AI news stories and connect them to higher education. Nick, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Zach?
I'm doing good, and we are not alone. We have some awesome guests with us today. We're going to introduce them. We are joined today by William Hardaway. He has a background in design thinking, product design, student services. William received his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Fresno State, as well as a master's degree in higher education administration and leadership, where he wrote a thesis on creative problem solving as a tool to address inequities in higher education. He is passionate about the role of instructional design and technology in the classroom, as well as inclusive teaching.
We're also joined by Jason McGensy. Jason has worked in higher ed since 2015, specializing in the areas of online course development, instructional media development, and academic technology support. Recently, Jason has been focusing on developing AI training for faculty, staff, and students. The course AI for Higher Ed Professionals, developed by Jason, was adopted by the CSU Chancellor's Office and is offered to all employees in the system, and was adapted and made available for all alumni of the Cal State system. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It's awesome to have you all on the podcast. We've corresponded before, we've been in some meetings, but we got to sit with each other and I got to hear you all present when we were at DECHI down in Palm Springs back in December. And I was really impressed by the work that you're doing. We have some questions about it. We want to jump right in. Nick, I think you've got the first question.
Yeah, so I'm less familiar with what you're all up to, and our listeners might be as well. So maybe you can just first take us on a little tour of the AI Institute at Fresno. What are you all trying to achieve there? And tell us a little bit about that.
So that came out of a previous iteration, which was a course design, an assignment design institute for faculty. And we had a summer where we had faculty come through and really think about an assignment as like a full experience rather than just an artifact or an object. So thinking about like who are the stakeholders involved in this assignment, what does it look like before the assignment, during the assignment, after the assignment, and what is that experience like for students? And then a couple of years ago, we adapted that for integration, AI integration. And so it's kind of the same thing, looking at taking people, and well, that was our intention. And then what we quickly realized is that the awareness wasn't where we thought it should be. And so the first part of this institute is raising awareness. So it's a 3-day kind of experience. We created this AI arcade concept to get people exposure to a bunch of different tools. And then we also cover ethics and integration in that experience as well.
I love that grew out of something that already existed rather than you sort of making something out of whole cloth. William or Jason, could you expand a little bit on the AI arcade? I think that the listeners might like to just get a visual in their head about like what that is and what kind of impression that makes on faculty.
Sure, I can take that one. So the AI arcade itself also grew out of an experience we had been doing called AI Playtime, which was really just an open lab where we had some iPads or some laptops available and people could come in, and we had some pre-written prompts just so people could get a sense of what they could do, because a lot of those chat bots, you come in and it's just a blank box that you can type in and like, what do I even do? So essentially the arcade was really, we really went for it. William used Suno to make some music that sounded like an 80s arcade theme, and we made up like arcade cabinets with game titles and everything. That went on the screens where those devices were for people, and it was really just sort of organized an organized opportunity to really get people hands-on with the tools because a lot of it is, you can go on there and ask a question and get some information, but there are a lot of other things you can do with the AI tools. So we wanted to give people that experience of what else could they possibly do before they got into looking at AI integration with assignments. Just because it may not be, I just want students to use it for writing. There are other things that were possible, so we wanted them to explore that.
Yeah. And then
That's so
one
cool.
one thing that Jason and I we talk about a lot is it seems like, at least on our campus, especially early on, that AI was synonymous with GPT, which is a platform
Right.
or model, a
Hmm.
specific model. And we wanted to kind of break through that too. Like, okay, that's a model, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, definitely.
If we could pause there for just a second, I think a lot of us that do this work have kind of landed on a similar truth, and I love your approach to it so much, and the idea of having people in person there to do it would be cool. A lot of the work Nick and I end up doing with faculty is on Zoom. And so oftentimes like telling people what to do, but then they're going off and doing it. But like the underlying truth of this is we continue to encounter huge swaths of faculty and academic leadership that just don't have any experience whatsoever with the tools.
Hmm.
And as you all know, there's no substitute for just getting in there and playing around for a while to see what's there. But I mean, I know it's in survey data and stuff, but I every time we do something like this, I am continue to be surprised at the number of faculty that is their first experience with a chatbot. You know, they read half an NPR article 18 months ago, and that was their training prior to showing up. And I mean, good on them for showing up. I have more concern about the people that aren't there. But yeah, I'm surprised every time.
Yeah, me too. It
Yeah.
no matter what room we get together, and the thing that I also tell faculty too is when we work with student groups, which is not often for Jason and I, but it's the same like ratio.
Right.
Hmm.
Most of the students were like, I've heard about it, my friend told me about it, I saw something about it, I saw memes about it, but I've never used it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Zach and I just have recently recorded a podcast about our AI retrofit, how we're training and working with faculty on this. And we did another one with some real experts and thinking about how to redesign writing using partly using AI. But one of the themes that comes through in these conversations is not just about the technology, but it's about what you have. I think your approach to the AI arcade is about our feelings, is about our reaction, emotions to encountering these technologies. Like you've got that blank box. You don't know what it does. You're kind of afraid of it. Like you've heard all the bad things about it and on all the ethical and moral implications possibly, but it's a tool, it's a technology. But we got to break through some of that human, cognition and emotional barriers that a lot of people still have to see what it can and can't do.
Yeah, and I want to get to that, but I do want to share one quick anecdote. The third sort of group in this is people in academic leadership, and I
Mhm.
felt lucky to have a audience with deans and chairs in the fall semester and a chance to speak with some engineering deans later on. But in one of those groups, I was working with people, and somebody was like, "Well, how do I get to the website?" And I'm just like, you could just like type it in you could just search for it. Like, do you, and I'm thinking to myself, is that our starting line is like how to find a website? But I mean, some of us, that's where we're at, I guess.
Yep. Every time we do some type of like an AR arcade or a workshop, Jason and I will often have that moment like, I didn't think that the breaking point would be where do I click to sign
Mm,
in? Like I
Right.
totally.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I do want to get to this what Nick brought up about sort of like the emotional piece. And I'm sure both of you will have a piece about this, but Jason, I've heard you present before, and I'm going to zero in on the concept of grief, which is something that you've shared before when you're doing this kind of work with faculty and AI. And I like your metaphor of that I've heard you mention about workshops as a sort of therapy or a sort of group therapy. And I was hoping you could just sort of unpack that a little bit for the listeners, how you arrived there, what kinds of things you do, whether you're also pursuing a marriage and family therapy license. Like, tell us what's going on.
Oh man, that would be interesting. No, it was just we were preparing to present about the institute that we were doing, and that morning of the presentation, I think it was this metaphor for whatever reason I must have been listening to something else, and they said something, and it just struck me that there was some overlap there. So a couple of the things I mentioned was that there were just some aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy practices or ideas that seemed to align with what we ended up doing in the training that we did. So one of them was a technique called affective labeling, just naming the feeling. One of the people I've really enjoyed listening to over the years is Karen Costa. I don't know if you were familiar with her work, but she at one point I heard her mention, don't just ask for what do people think, also ask for their thinks and feels. And I think that's been really interesting because sometimes it's the feelings that are really the blockers and not the thoughts at all. So just naming what people are feeling is useful. Exposure therapy, which is kind of like what we were doing with the AI arcade. People are afraid of these tools and students are using them, and it's okay. Let's in a safe environment where nothing's bad, nothing bad is going to happen, and we're here to help you sort of see how those things work. Cognitive reframing is another big technique, shifting the thinking. A lot of it is, AI is being used for students to cheat. And one of the things I like to tell people is you can use Microsoft Word to cheat too.
Right.
So, reframing, AI is a tool that you could use to cheat or you could use to do other things, just like other tools. So
Totally.
hopefully helping people reframe how they're thinking about AI. And then the last one was really structured decision making, encouraging action and getting them to actually do something with the tools, think about how they would implement it in the classroom so it's not so scary. And again, it actually moves them to action and not just being stuck in processing.
Hmm.
I think you are
That's,
about halfway to a degree at this point
I
because
know.
that was much more sophisticated than any explanation I've ever heard before.
Hey,
So,
and maybe in the future these models will need a form of therapist. So
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was something I think we all learned when OpenAI degraded ChatGPT 4.0, and
oh yeah.
Twitter and Reddit were just flooded with people
Yeah.
that felt like they had lost their friend or their
Mhm.
therapist or their grief counselor or whatever. So there's definitely a weird sort of interrelationship where people are using these tools for those things, but then they're also needing help along the way with those things.
Right.
One of the things Nick and I have talked about a bit lately, Nick's done more work with faculty over a sustained period of time. We're going to meet every Friday for 2 hours or whatever. And one of our just sort of casual observations is that the sort of therapy grief part of that seems to work better in that format than a lot of the stuff that I do, which is more intensive. It sounds like that's, the institute format because I want to give people time to like process that the world has changed, but that I'm always like, and now we're doing the next thing, and now you need to fill out this table. And I feel bad about that, but we have sort of stumbled into certain formats seem to be better than others for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been wrestling with that for a long time too, because obviously, like we talked about earlier, you get into this room and you're shocked that like, okay, this is your first time doing this thing, and so there's an awareness gap. But then you think about like, okay, but that's just the start of the conversation, and we got a lot more places we need to get to. And so the session that we actually just came from right now is a community of practice for academic affairs staff on our campus. And yeah, it's paced out in a way where they're having a lot deeper conversations than
Hmm.
what faculty normally get to in our institute, just because they have a bit of homework, they go and they process things, they do things, and then they come back and they have thoughts and observations, and they share articles with one another, they share videos. Yeah, so I agree with you. I feel like if we can have that spacing in a proper way, we can get to a lot deeper conversations. But it's often the case that it's like, hey, here's the tools, and What do you think? Okay, now do something with them.
Yeah, no, part of it is just this timing limitation. I've been fortunate to be able to lead two faculty community sessions over the course of 2 semesters where we meet for 2 hours for like 10 Fridays, of the semester. And it's really incredible to work with people that long and that in depth. But we got like five, six people signing up. We did
Right.
another one, which was 3 hours every Friday for 7 weeks last semester. And it's a certain segment that are going to be able to commit
Mhm.
to that. And there was very few days that everybody was there. But I
Right.
think if there are funding and space to have those intensive, drawn out things, it does, offer that kind of deeper community and processing. But we're also in a race against time too, because so many changes need to be made.
Yeah.
And the work that you all are doing and the kind of model that Zach is doing is really like, okay, we can get 50 people in here in 3 days, on their off time, whether it's winter or just after the semester. And boom, now we've got 50 people on campus that are ready to go do some new things.
Mhm.
And I think I was going to ask, how did you get people to come on Friday? And then you said, okay, it's a lower number, so that's okay.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Um, but I think one of the things we've been doing is kind of going around presenting to departments about the programming that we have available. And one of the things that continues to come out is that the faculty are not having these conversations
With
themselves among
Mhm.
themselves in their spaces that already exist for them. So I think creating spaces for that to happen is something we folks in our roles really need to continue to do.
That is a really good point. I'll just throw in there that what I've learned is that now we did one for sociology, my department. That was great because we were all sort of on the same page, both disciplinary, but also in our approach to AI, just we were different stages of where we're at with it. We did one for the bigger college for behavioral science, social science, and people would report that, in their home department, they couldn't have these conversations the way we were having them. They were afraid to bring them up, or there's such a degree of disagreement that it was difficult to have that space. So creating these communities is really a way to get people into safer
Yeah.
environments, into places they can share these ideas.
And that's the part that I'm most interested in too in these conversations is there is a lot of in our media landscape today, there's a lot of geopolitics connected
Hmm.
to corporations and products and stuff like that. And my biggest worry is always like in the academic context, I try to bring this up in every room that we're in. We're talking about faculty and students, and we're often talking about faculty and job replacement and students and criminality of cheating. And we're so one note. And I'm like, there's a lot of other stakeholders at the table, and the people that can really drive change are the people that are making decisions. And so you'll often hear claims like, students are using it to cheat, and I'm like, okay, let's say that claim is true. Like the majority of students are using it to cheat. Have you seen the ads that are run on YouTube regarding AI by actual corporations that we license from? And what is that? And they're not aligned with our values, obviously. So who's telling them that they're not aligned with our values, and who's putting pressure on them, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I did want to circle back to the list of therapy techniques. The first one really resonated with what I do with my students. So I wanted to bring students into this, where when I assign AI assignments, instead of just having a sort of metacognitive reflection about the material, the content, I always include one about what was their experience or feeling of using ChatGPT in my case in the assignment. Tell me about that. Tell me what you liked, didn't like, what it made you, how did you approach it? Like, what did you get from that? And I've been collecting, for years now, self-reports from students on just their experience using it. And I mean, in general, I would say there's a lot of novelty. A lot of students self-report, and I don't know, you can take it the grain of salt, but that they actually like doing that assignment, that they were wowed by it or impressed by this is a different way to learn. It's not the only way to learn. It shouldn't replace the other ways, but it is a new and kind of interesting and dynamic and different way to approach material than just watching a video or doing a reading, things like that.
Yeah, I've been working on an asynchronous version of the Institute that we've been doing. And one of the things I was working on yesterday, I came across an article that was about um, the concept of feedback literacy. I don't know if you've looked into that. That's some research that really started growing at the end of the teens into the start of the 20s. And there was an article that was published about feedback literacy specifically related to generative AI that came out last year. And it was really just looking at students' ability to deal with and process,
Mhm.
if they get how do they deal with what AI is telling them? If they upload their work and they want to get an evaluation, or if they, getting some input from that as feedback or as a partner in something they're working on, do they accept that? Do they feel like their work is being rejected if it's giving them, suggestions for what they should do? Do they accept that uncritically? So just thinking about how do students, getting students to think not just how do you use the tools in terms of technologically, but also to continue to develop that critical thinking and discernment with the outputs that you're getting from the tools.
Yeah, I like that.
Jason, that is a great idea. We've tried to do some of the asynchronous stuff here. I won't say we've been successful, but we have tried to do that. And I assume that one of the reasons you're trying to do that is because there's always this pressure to scale. We all work at mid-sized or larger institutions. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about what's stopping us from being able to scale up the work that we're doing, or what are our best ideas to make some of this scalable, right? Is it just that you only have so many hours in the day? Are we exhausting the number of people that want to do some of this work? Well, I want to have a conversation about I mean, I think that in between us, Nick and I have done intensive or FLC programming that's hit probably just under 200 folks on campus, but we've got probably 950 faculty members. That's a big gap, and I really got to be honest, I'm not sure how to close it. So what are your best and worst ideas?
I'm waiting for William to answer.
Yeah, I don't think we got
No,
any elegant
I'm
solutions.
joking. Yeah. So one of the things we talk about scale, things like asynchronous courses, a lot of times when we talk about something being able to scale up, it's the fact that it's available for people to do it. But a lot of times people don't take advantage of those opportunities. And so you've made something to scale, but it doesn't actually have the intended effect because people for whatever reason don't engage with it, and some of it could be that they need some of this therapy stuff that we've been talking about before they can engage with that, but that's the thing that's available to them, and then they get in there and they can't do it because there's things they need to break through that probably is best processed with other people in community before they then do that thing. So it may be that that thing is better for someone who's been through that other experience first.
Yeah, and one of the telling signs of that for Jason and I is we, like he was saying, we go around, we do outreach to departments, and so I went to our College of Engineering, and it was specifically for their staff across the whole college. And I was just telling them about the programming we had and telling them about our asynchronous course for professionals on AI. And they were like, hey, that I'm interested in AI and I'm interested in that, but like that format just doesn't, I it won't work for me. I'll always come up with some excuse about how I'm too busy or whatever. And so we ended up doing like an intensive to because that we were having that course lead into a funnel where they were eligible for community practice. And so we ended up doing a was it a 2 day? Did we do a
Yep.
2 day? Yeah,
2 day.
a 2 day. We separated by week, but intensive to get people the same content that they can get from that asynchronous course. So what Jason is saying is absolutely right. Like I think about like the big wave that we had of massive online courses and concept and in theory, it's great that MIT and Harvard are providing these certificates and stuff like that. But when you look at the actual metrics of who completes, it's not gonna get us to the scale we think we should be at.
Yeah.
And there, I think there are models that work. Like here in California, we have Calbright, which is the fully online community college, and it's asynchronous, it's self-paced, but that model is working because they put a lot of
Oh,
support
wow.
around student support services and
Mhm.
people checking in and making sure you're going through. A lot of times
Yeah.
we make an asynchronous course, we post it on Canvas, say, here's the
Let's
link,
go.
you can register and good
Uh-huh.
luck. So sometimes asynchronous works with a lot of support.
With a lot of
Hmm.
support. Yep.
Yeah, we have a distance education program here in sociology, and our dropout withdrawal rates are much higher in those classes than are on campus because of, people are out there on their own trying to figure it all out, and they become overwhelmed and just fade away or drop
Yep.
out. But I'm thinking in my mind when I'm listening to you, because I'm on the faculty side, I'm like, okay, there's got to be a typology of the kinds of people that are out there that we're trying to reach, right? The people who are just resistant because they're against AI. Well, we may never reach them. There's the people like you mentioned, the person who says, "Oh, I'd love to do that week training, but I'm the kind of person who will just find an excuse not to do it," right? So part of that is overcoming the different kind of like typologies of people's interest or self-selection into these kind of things. But then I'm also thinking about what can be offered. Like, so for us, it's always, of course, been important to offer money. So faculty respond well to, hey, how much do I get paid in professional development or into actual bank account, right? And
Right.
there's got to be some kind of threshold there, right? When we're doing, it's like 500, 750, what is that threshold? Zach knows more about this than I do. So there's a money aspect. There's, as you say, resource, like how much in your unit can you develop or devote to
Mhm.
individual faculty or a group of faculty. You've got so many other job responsibilities, and time commitment, right? So I'm thinking like, if you were to think about those people that were maybe 100, like so Zach says, we have 950, we've done about 200. There's still like a 750 gap there, or 700 gap. If we wanted to reach like that next 100, but it could only be in like a bite-sized chunk, what is the most important thing in your AI literacy or AI, training kind of thing that you think would be like, here, you've got 3 hours. This is what you could do.
In terms of topic?
Yeah, like topics and like things that they would get their hands on if you could only get them for
Mhm.
like a short amount of time.
Mhm.
Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking like if to solve this problem of the
Yeah.
remaining, we got to have to develop probably different kind of curriculum for
Yeah.
different kind of people.
I always start with like my ideal learning flow into AI is starting from a position of critique,
Mm,
because I feel like if you don't start from position, because there's only really two groups that worry me. It's the group of people in the workshop that say I'm completely against it. I'm never using it. It's fine that you're completely against it and you don't want your students to use it, but you need to be aware of what it actually is before you can
Yes.
effectively do
yeah.
that. And then the other group that worries me is they're like, I just give it everything and I make every decision with it. I'm like, that worries me because there's a corporation making decisions and people that actually programmed it that decided what it's going to do. And, so
Yeah.
I think for me, it's always starting from a position of critique. I'm more interested, and it's hard to get faculty to do this because they kind of have this tunnel vision of like, oh, this class is about humanities and the Civil War. Like, I'm always interested in the topic of a. I'm always interested in AI as a topic as opposed to a tool. So if you're not going to use it as a tool or have your students use it as a tool, like let's talk about it as a topic. And what does that mean for your discipline, for their future careers? Let's critique what this phenomenon is that's going on in the world.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's pivot here a little bit. How do you connect this AI work that you've been developing there and working a lot on, to other aspects of the work that you've done that you want to do? For example, William, you've been leading in equity work throughout the whole CSU. How do you see this connection from AI to the other kind of things that you think are important in the jobs that you're in the work that you're doing?
I think it goes back to like I'm thinking about equity mindedness in the classroom. I think about two aspects of it. I think about and also something that was brought up earlier about like just the motivation or the time and the resources to engage in some of this development. And I think about the larger societal issue right now of the economy. And I think about our institutions in the CSU and the issues with pay equity and stuff that is in the zeitgeist. And I think, well, if we want people to engage in that way, like, do they have the capacity, like financially, in terms of energy, in terms of their structure? Do they have a supervisor that, like you mentioned earlier, is that do they have a supervisor that's willing to let them to devote time to do those things? And then I also think about the decision making power with a few corporations that have the larger models. Because like I think sometimes we think about AI as this like infinite tunnel of tons of different models, but there's really only four or five. And what really was telling for me was when Grok and the community notes was going on in Twitter and X in the first early stages. And then you had the CEO get checked by its own AI. And then the CEO's response was to tell the developers, I don't like it doing that. And then the developers who feared for their jobs and their livelihood said, okay, well, we'll tune it so it doesn't do that. And that's just wrong. And
But it's so important that we got to witness that in real time. But yes, terribly wrong.
right. But it's kind of that thing of like, how do we build our capacity to get to the point where we are, because higher ed, we're huge. The CSU alone, 23 campuses, that's powerful. And how do we unite that voice to say, this is what we want from these products that we're investing in, this is what we don't like, and this is what we see as a path forward?
That is such an important question. And I actually wish we could do another podcast just on that because I think that's so needed in this this whole conversation.
Yeah, I could not agree more. You guys have been awesome with your time. I feel like we could probably take a break for lunch, come back and record like three more episodes,
Yeah,
just the four
probably.
of us together, just unpacking little bits here. But we do close out with a less serious segment. We always do either what we call irresponsible speculation or bad analogy. And so we're gonna go with bad analogy today. So we like the grief comparison. We use that. One of our favorite pieces that we've read is an Inside Higher Ed article by Christy Gerdary. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. It was, and we'll link to that in the show notes about like stages of grief with teaching and AI. So we don't think that grief and therapy is a bad analogy, but we did want to talk about like what are the limitations of that because we've leaned on that as well. So, what are we like the comparison? We use it, but what are the limitations? I want to kick off that sometimes Nick and I aren't sure when somebody is throwing up resistance, like William was talking about earlier, or we aren't always sure how genuine that is. Sometimes it seems like the things that people are offering up as resistance are sort of a convenient cover for this is a new thing, it's inconvenient, and I don't want to deal with that.
Yep.
And I do wonder, and I've worked with faculty sometimes, and they're just like well, I think I'm just going to retire, like I just can't do this. And I understand the grieving part of that, but sometimes I wonder like is that really what's going on, or are you just like not willing to put in the work to do the things that you probably need to do? So that's the limitation that I've spotted sometime. And I'm not going to name names. Nick, if you and I ever have a premium version of this that people have to pay for, that's the kind of thing for the premium version where
Yeah.
we're just like list the names of the people that we don't like working with. But
Hmm.
what do you guys think? What do you think of as the sort of like limitations or boundaries of the grief and therapy as organizing analogy?
Hmm. I guess what comes to my mind is like I've been, and honestly, this has been recently that this has been coming up, like in academics and media. But I used to think of, and I think the rest of us used to think of grief as like a moment. And then
Yes.
now I'm realizing, and I think society's realizing that it's never ending. And I think that's a kind of like an issue with if we're using that analogy. How do we help people? Because I think that's one of the hardest parts of development in general is teaching people how to learn and why it's important to continue learning. And so yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about grief, a lot of times you're talking about loss. And so I think, part of what I think we need to do is unpack what is it that people think they've lost. And I think
Mhm.
some of the things that have been lost are things that are not things we need to grieve. With AI, in some cases,
Yeah,
there are
totally.
some things that were sort of grandfathered in a sense, when people came into teaching that were unquestioned and
Are
have
you
been sort
talking
of
about?
default assumptions.
Are you talking about essays, Jason?
And maybe there are some things that are worth exploration and examination, and
Mhm.
you can grieve the loss of them in the sense that it requires you to do something different, and we don't have an exact answer for what that different thing is. To say, okay, you were doing this, you can't do that thing anymore, or it's not as effective. Now do this instead. That doesn't exist right now and may not ever
That's
exist.
uncomfortable, Jason. I don't like the way
Yeah,
that.
right. And to
Uh,
your point, like you sometimes you just have to you got to live in that tension.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I also think about that faculty academics, to borrow from the ancient Greeks, the idea of melancholy is sort of like this state, and Aristotle's idea that it was connected to sort of genius, and that genius people, not to say that most of us are geniuses here, but people who are really smart and doing creative things tend towards melancholy in this ever-ending process, as William talked about, of this grief. I think it is kind of an environment where, because we are steeped in critique of, that's a lot of what the disciplines do, is critique and not necessarily build. I mean, obviously in engineering, they may have a different opinion there, but there is a disposition of melancholy, I think, that we're working with at the baseline that might be different than other populations outside of the university when you're talking about new things and
Mhm.
adopting new things like that.
Something William shared sort of, I hadn't really thought about this, but like, you're right. Usually when we're thinking about grief, like Jason said, we're thinking about loss. Something happens. My dog died, and I'm sad about that, and then I'm processing that, and then eventually you adopt another dog. Turns out that dog's a huge jerk, and you have to. Anyway, this is getting way too specific. But like, it's a thing that happens, right? And one of the differences here is this is a thing that is happening like in real time. And we're making adaptations, and then we realize those adaptations don't work anymore, or now there's a new thing. So rather than like this sort of like clean traditional cycle, we're sort of restarting aspects of this again and again. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why there is a sense of exhaustion for faculty around some of this work, because it's not a one and done. You just keep doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to Jason's point, if like just him, like even me as a kind of like tech forward person, like the way Jason was describing that process of like, hey, we have to do something different, something, it makes you feel a certain kind of way. Like, what's the something? And like, do you
Mhm.
know? Do you know? Do you know? No, we don't know. And
Uh,
that's hard to wrestle with, especially when you talk about things like writing and things that have just
Yeah.
been institutionalized
Forever,
forever.
ever. Yeah,
yeah.
And
totally.
Like,
and
how
the
does it look?
something may not be at the level of the individual faculty member in their class,
Right.
but
Right,
that's all that they have
Yeah.
control over in that
right.
moment. And there
Yeah.
may be structural things that need to shift or change, and that's a
Yeah.
bigger conversation that requires more people and so forth. But in the moment, I got this class I got to deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's why although it might be a limited analogy, I am like on board with your list of like therapy
It's
practices,
so
but also
good.
the stages
Mhm.
of grief, because those are frameworks that I just keep coming back to because they do work in this context really well, and I think they provide us tools to help each other get some control, to make uncertainty more certain, and to kind of move into the new easier, right? So I'm for them.
And it is a field, that when you go into therapy, they tell you like we're not solving.
Yeah.
There's no like solution, no magic pill.
Yeah.
This is a process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.